The Almighty は未来を改変する力だ。さあ、絶望してくれる。
なんだよあれ。ブラックホール、ブラックホール、ブラックホール、レボリューション。あれが完全体。
So recently a friend of mine got me into watching Kamen Rider Build, and while I was a little apprehensive about it at first, after finishing the show, I can say it's pretty enjoyable, highly recommend watching it, if not just for the person participating in this fight in today's matchup, Kamen Rider Evolt, the main villain, who is one of the most based people of all time. There's like no other way to actually describe him. Because he's kind of like the Kamen Rider version of someone like Yhwach, where he's like this giga OP, super imposing presence in the verse. Although their plans really aren't anywhere near the same, I just think they kind of have the same role as villains. Except, well, Yhwach is kind of like really cool and overbearing, and this dominant villain, Evolt's the same way, while making like coffee jokes and saying ciao, being like, yo, what's up, man? I'm not doing it justice, but I highly recommend that after watching this video, or even right now, if after talking about this character or this just interests you, to go ahead and watch Kamen Rider Build, because this guy is definitely worth watching the series. Now, the other reason we're doing this is that I want to actually bring more Bleach content to the channel. I've noticed I've kind of just been doing my own thing, just talking about like Transformers and stuff, and Yu-Gi-Oh characters. So I'm taking just a bit of a different approach now. Instead of just watching a new series and then making a video just on that character, I'm probably going to pit them up against some appropriate Bleach character and see how well they do. Maybe they win, maybe they don't, maybe they're so broken that they gotta like fight the entire verse or something, like on some Thanos energy. But for all of you guys that are wanting more Bleach content, you can rest assured, I think with this new plan, we're going to be getting more Bleach content. Now, with all that being said, if you enjoy power scaling content and you especially enjoy Bleach content, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. Because as you guys can see, your boy is coming with those consistent uploads. They would be even more consistent if YouTube wasn't always obliterating my videos. That's why sometimes you might see a GIF or anything. I know I see a lot of comments being like, bro, why is Chica on the screen right now? It's because for whatever reason, that particular anime studio was just not having it. Usually we make it a little scrolly effect, throw some dust on the screen, and we're absolutely fine. But sometimes these studios are just way too much for me to handle. And you haven't lived through your own personal hell until you've tried to upload a video for like 4 days straight. But enough of all that. You guys aren't here for my personal life and everything. You guys are here for the actual video. So with all that being said, you guys know how we do things here on the channel. We're going to go over their strength, speed, and abilities. And then we'll go into the final segment of the video where I talk about who I think would actually win this matchup. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start off with the boy Yhwach, as he is the home team. Now, most everyone that is just vaguely familiar with Bleach should know where this is going, because we've scaled Yhwach quite a bit over here on the Bleach Hub channel. But for those of you guys that may be new, or maybe you just saw a Kamen Rider character and this is your first time coming to the channel, Yhwach is pretty much the big bad of the entirety of the Bleach series. We thought it was Aizen, but then turns out even Aizen is just a speck in the palm of Yhwach's plan, as he oversees countless different timelines. But how does he stack up from a physical power perspective? Well, there's two different ways you can scale Yhwach. There's the more kind of lowballed version of him, where you say that he killed Bankai Yamamoto. Bankai Yamamoto is able to threaten the entirety of the Soul Society by merely existing. The Soul Society itself is at least multi-solar system in terms of its size, because not only is there a sun in the Soul Society, but there are numerous stars in the night sky that Kamen and his friend are able to see. They just blatantly point it out, and you can see just dozens of skies in the Soul Society. So we know the realm is quite massive. And even if you think maybe Yhwach just ganged up on Bankai Yamamoto after he was exhausted from using his Bankai in quite a long time, the fact that Yhwach is able to contain Yamamoto's Bankai does show that he does at least scale to it, because you have to be strong enough to contain the person's Bankai that you're trying to steal. Even then, he actually kills Ichibei, who's touted by Yhwach and Ichibei himself as being the king of the Shinigami, being the guy that stands atop all of the Shinigami, and he actually kills that dude. So even if for whatever reason you think he like snuck up on a weakened Bankai Yamamoto or something, not only can he contain his Bankai, but he can actually beat somebody that is touted as being stronger than that Yamamoto. But even if you don't buy any of that, there's also the fact that Yhwach is said to be the only one that can contain Gremmy's power in Can't Fear Your Own World. Grammy obviously being the guy that's strong enough to create pocket dimensions that contain galaxies and nebulas, meaning Grammy can create with his imagination multi-galactic sized dimensions, and yet Yhwach is still said to be able to contain his power. In fact, when Grammy starts going on a tear during the second invasion of the Soul Society, it's actually mentioned by the Stern Reader. They're like, why did His Majesty let Grammy out? Implying that Yhwach controls exactly when Grammy gets to go fight and when he's not allowed to fight and he has to rein him back in. However, there's another different way to go ahead and scale Yhwach, and that would be Yhwach after gaining the Soul King's power. Because once he gains the Soul King's power, he has the same responsibility as the Soul King, where he has to regulate all of the various realms in Bleach, which at bare minimum is 3, extending to the World of the Living, the Soul Society, and Hueco It's also mentioned by people like Ganju that even the Garganta is not going to be safe, the in-between world of all the 3 main realms. And while it is highly debated as to what the size of these realms are, at bare minimum, since these 3 realms comprise the Bleach universe, and Yhwach is said to be able to control all the realms, destroy them at his leisure, he's basically god of the verse. At bare minimum, by definition, destroying the realms that make up the Bleach verse would be a universal feat. That is literally the baseline requirement for being universal, is wiping everything out of your universe. It is potentially higher if you start to believe that some of the realms in Bleach are their own infinite time spaces, which is again arguable for the Soul Society and the World of the Living, but for things like Hueco there's a few statements that imply that it does have infinite size. These are also a little contentious for some people because there's statements like the infinite sand of Hueco or Hueco like its deserts go on forever. And some people argue that those might be poetic. If you don't think they're poetic and you think they're meant to be taken literally as a size for the realm, then it would mean at the bare minimum Hueco would be this infinite size realm, and it would give Yhwach a bit of a buff. But the most you're really going to get him to is going to be multiversal by proxy of destroying 3 universal sized realms. There are other things like Hell, which are also quite large in and of themselves. However, we actually aren't aware if Yhwach is going to be affecting things like Hell. That's a little more ambiguous, especially with some of the more new information coming out with the continuation of the Bleach manga. And before I definitively say, yeah, Yhwach is actually going to destroy Hell, I want to see what the continuation of the manga actually does with Hell, since the next arc, for those of you guys that are not aware, is pretty much revolving around our characters going to Hell and finally dealing with whatever threat is in there. But just to summarize, at bare minimum, he would be multi-solar. Kind of a more mid-range would be low multi-galaxy. Then, with the Soul King's powers, he's definitely at bare minimum universal. Arguably infinite in terms of his power if you use the Hueco statements. And then at max, he would be a low multiversal character, being able to destroy 3 universal-sized realms if you argue the high end for Yhwach. Evolt also has a bit of quirky scaling going for him, as some of his more casual showings are him just making black holes that can completely destroy planets. Some of these are the size of like a couple city blocks. Some of these absolutely dwarf planets in terms of their size. And he has complete control over said black holes as well. And while we could actually go into detail about how crazy and how absolutely nuts this is, he actually has even better showings on top of this. Because the most concrete thing you should be able to put Evolt to is actually just universal. Because there's a thing in Kamen Rider Build called Pandora's Box that Evolt uses to make his actual suit. Like, his suit has the power of Pandora's Box, which is stated numerous times to have the power to destroy the universe. So it just means that Evolt, by proxy of just being in his Kamen Rider form, has this universal destroying power, but it actually gets a little more crazy than this, as Pandora's Box is capable of fusing the normal universe with the Build universe, and the reason this is a little crazy is that both of these universes are kind of like Bleach in a way, where they're split up into their own individual universes, because they're split into things like their own mirror dimensions, their own nega dimensions. But even more crazy is that the main Rider universe that Build is fusing into was already fused together by Kamen Rider Decade, who fused, quote, countless universes into the main Rider universe, basically making the main Rider universe this combination of an infinite multiverse compressed down into one universe. And then Pandora's box is being used to fuse that infinite multiversal compressed realm into their main universe. Keep in mind, all of these universes have their own mirror dimensions and nega dimensions, and that the main Rider universe, despite being this compressed infinite multiverse, then again gets resplit into another countless multiverse. So it's like a compressed infinite multiverse that's also an infinite multiverse at the same time. I'm sure the Rider lore heads in the comments down below will try to make sense of all of that. But from a power scaling perspective, it is extremely powerful because it means at bare minimum, Evolt, just by merely existing, is universal. He has this universal destroying power that is just a part of him. And then at max, he is like multiversal plus, since he would scale to an infinite multiverse. Moving into Yhwach's speed, this is something again that I've done quite extensively on the channel, so I'll kind of just speed run the calculation for end of series Bleach Speed. So essentially you have Ichigo, who's traveling from the Soul Palace to the Soul Society. He travels for at bare minimum half a day, which is 12 hours. Then you have the Mimehage and the Ashwaulan that are able to travel that same distance in about 4 to 5 seconds, given that it's just a panel or two that they travel from the Soul Society to back to the Soul Palace, or vice versa if you're using the Ashwaulan. Then you have characters like Yhwach who directly react to said Mimehage, or the Quincy Girls reacting to the Ashwaulan. This is generally around 2 million times the speed of light, given that Ichigo, when he performs the feat of traveling for 12 hours, is at bare minimum the speed of light at that point in the series. To argue that he's any slower is absolutely asinine, considering that in the Soul Society arc, we're already getting relativistic feats, and Ichigo himself in Bankai should already be the speed of light. It's just very odd to assume that for that specific calculation that he's the speed of lightning or something, unless you're trying to do a hyper-specific giga lowballed count to try to downplay their speed, but realistically, they're just in this 2 mil range. But it actually gets a little bit better for Yhwach because he's able to fight full power Ichigo, and he's able to react to him. Keep in mind that this means Ichigo is stacking his Bankai and his Holification on top of this, both of which are at bare minimum 10 times multipliers each, meaning Ichigo at this point, and a lot of the god tiers in terms of speed that are around full power Ichigo's level of power and speed, would be around 200 million times the speed of light, which is pretty insanely fast to say the least. As for Evolt, his speed can vary absolutely wildly. I've already mentioned that he kind of creates black holes to destroy planets and whatnot, and he is able to resist the effects of the black holes, meaning at bare minimum he's faster than the speed of light, as we know that light cannot escape the pull of a black hole. However, it actually gets a little more ridiculous than that when you consider that Evolt travels across the universe searching for sentient life to continue to grow his power. And so we know that after he's finished with Earth, he's going to go search for another place that contains sentient life, or at least he's going to continue his search to try to find sentient life, as he himself says that it's very hard to find planets that have sentient life on them. Now, given what we know and how long Evolt has spent on planet Earth, we know the next place he'll probably try to go is Alpha Centauri, which is a few light years away. As for us, it's the nearest planet believed to have life, and he's kind of in this general area anyway. I mean, general area when you consider the grand scope of the universe, so it would be one of the next places he would try to go to, and flying somewhere around there would put him at around 120 to 130 million times the speed of light. You can obviously get him much faster if you say that he's going to fly to a further galaxy in search of different sentient life, or maybe you think he's not going to fly that far out to Alpha Centauri. Maybe you think the next place he's going to is Pluto, but we know that he's more than likely going to leave the solar system based on the supermassive black hole that he's planning on using in our solar system. So we know he does at least have to leave the range of the solar system, which makes the most likely assumption for him to go to would be someplace like Alpha Centauri. Now we move on to one of the more fun parts of the video where we talk about the abilities of both of the combatants, and I'm not gonna lie boys, I'm going to just water this down a lot because both Yhwach and Evolt have so many different abilities that I'm just gonna stick to the core main abilities they're more than likely going to use in this fight, but do keep in mind that they both have so many different abilities unto themselves that I could probably just make separate videos on their abilities alone. Now the main ability that Yhwach is going to be using is the Almighty. Again, another ability, just one of the powers he has that probably deserves its own video just with how much random nonsense it's able to do. But just in a simple definition of what this does is it allows Yhwach to see countless possible futures and rewrite what's going to happen in those futures if he doesn't like the outcome. And this even extends to things where he dies and he's able to rewrite his death, as during the final battle with Ichigo and Aizen, Ichigo actually does kill Yhwach, but Yhwach then revives himself and says, I rewrote that future, so I've actually not died. He can also set up things like traps in advance through his manipulation of the future, or he can destroy all Bankais in the future, meaning if he gets to that point in whatever future timeline he's in, at that point all Bankais are gone. The only odd thing about stuff like that, and I'm assuming this is just because Kubo was pressed for time, is that he says, I've destroyed all Bankais in the future, but Ichigo's still using his Bankai in the battle against Yhwach. Either all Bankais are actually not destroyed in the future and Yhwach's capping, or it has something to do with Tsukishima's weird ability being used to restore Ichigo's Bankai. Argue that in the comments down below. The other weakness I think the Almighty actually has is that Yhwach actually doesn't always use it, and he can turn it on and off because there appears to be some discrepancies as to when he's using the Almighty. For instance, when you have a character that can use this future sight ability, you're always going to be asking, why didn't you see that coming? You can kind of excuse it in the first battle between Yhwach and Ichigo because Yhwach specifically says, I'm turning off my future sight ability because I just want to experience firsthand how far you've come. I want to have a fair fight against you where you can kind of just slug it out. And he only turns on the Almighty once Ichigo initially uses his Bankai. But just some odd things are like, he never saw Ichigo coming to stab him in the back and then had to activate the Almighty to revive himself. He didn't see the arrow coming from Uryu. He wasn't able to properly discern what Hashfald was trying to show him in his dreams about him being inevitably defeated by Ichigo's like original Shikai. Just a few oddities with the Almighty's, like it seems that Yhwach doesn't always have it on, or sometimes he'll see something in a future that he's not able to properly discern. Weird things towards the end of the series that you can tell Kubo had to put in flaws into Yhwach's character, or like little things into the Almighty to make it more believable that he lost, because it just seems very rushed. Like a lot of these issues come in like the last 5 chapters of the series where it was rushed. So if you decide to read Bleach and you're like, dang, Yhwach's really OP, then in like the last 5 chapters the Almighty kind of falls apart, it's probably because the series was rushed. But other things that Yhwach has is that he can actually attack the souls of his opponent and erase them from existence with Quincy arrows, as Quincy arrows actually remove the souls of whatever they kill from the cycle of reincarnation, as they're designed to completely eradicate hollows so they can never come back. Another Quincy ability that he uses is called Sanct Alter, which actually allows him to steal his opponent's abilities, and he also tries to use a similar ability to invade his opponent's body and steal their body by like infusing his essence into them. Although the only time he tries to use that, Ichibei flexes it off, so I guess if you're stronger than Yhwach, you can resist it, like most things in Bleach. He also has Blute Vein and Blute Artery, which are manipulations of a Quincy's blood to either make them stronger or more defensive. So it basically can either just raise your durability by a massive amount or raise your offensive power by a massive amount. And then we also know that he can open portals between the different dimensions as he travels from the Soul Palace to the Soul Society. And so we know that he can kind of just travel between dimensions. because he seems to open a Garganta-like system to travel that distance, so we know that he can pretty much travel wherever he wants within a universe. And that's just kind of like the basic setup for what Yhwach can do. You can argue him using all of the different Sternritter abilities, and then you can also argue that it's not in character for him to do so, because he never actually does it. But then you can also argue that, well, it's not out of character for him to use it, it's just the Almighty is so much better than all those abilities, and it never really came up for him to use something like the Iron or something, or the Heat, and he really didn't need to have that like huge final battle that Kubo wanted him to have, which he said in an interview that he wanted him to basically fight the entire Bleach cast. Maybe would have seen him utilizing all of the different Quincy abilities in that, but like I'm saying, there is a lot more than he can do. We just don't have 3 hours to go over all of the different abilities and the implications of everything that he can do. Like I mentioned earlier, Evolt's also pretty much all over the place with all of his different abilities as well, so I'm going to try to condense this as much as possible. This guy could definitely have his own video dedicated to what he could do, so if you're one of the Rider fans watching this, I'm sorry, we can't be here for 3 hours going over all the different random Rider powers this guy's got. But one of the main things that Evolt has going for him is his like biological manipulation. In the same way that Yhwach is pretty hard to kill because of the Almighty, Evolt's extremely hard to get rid of because he can literally put his DNA into anyone to take their bodies over or remain dormant in their body to become reborn at a later date. I swear they have actually taken this guy down, I think 9 different times, and he just keeps coming back. This weird biological manipulation also extends to the poison that he's able to create. He just stabs people with poison, and because it's from this weird alien race that nobody knows of, it is basically incurable by any modern medicine. For Kamen Rider Build, who is the main character of Build, it was going to kill him in 3 days, and the only ways to cure it are through the Genius Bottle that only Kamen Rider Build has, or Evolt removing the poison itself. Then there's a few parts of Evolt's actual suit that have different functions that I like to read over. Quote, the EVO face guard, the protective device that protects the wearer's head. In response to an enemy's physical attack, it is possible to release a shockwave that counteracts and invalidates damage, basically meaning Evolt, just because of his helmet, is completely invulnerable to physical damage. The core in his chest is called the Catastrophe Reactor that can increase his combat ability up to 50 times, so at any point during the fight, Evolt can just increase his power by 50 times. Then he has the EV-BH Signal Blades, which, quote, the data collection device unit. It is possible to aggregate battle data in real time, and it also manages the state of the whole body, and if there's a damaged part, it performs emergency repair automatically, so his suit basically gives him regen. And we already knew before his suit, he already had a very good idea of people's battle powers. In fact, somebody would hit him, and there's a thing in Kamen Rider Build called Hazard Level, which is almost like a power level in Dragon Ball, where it'd be like, oh, your hazard level is a 4.5, you can't beat me because I'm a hazard level 4.7. And Evolt throughout the entire series has been very keen on determining exact hazard levels from people, and now not only is he really good at determining it, but his suit is also helping him do that as well as just kind of giving him just additional data during fights. Also, most notably, the guy that's called Black Hole can create black holes, although I've kind of already talked about that. A final thing for Kamen Rider Evolt over here that I probably should mention is that because Yhwach is a spiritual being, can Evolt even interact with Yhwach? Well, yes, there's 2 methods of arguing this. One, there is a person called Kamen Rider Ghost, who is literally a spiritual being that characters like Kamen Rider Ex-Aid or the viruses in the crossover movies are able to interact with. And not only is Build also able to interact with Kamen Rider Ex-Aid, he's able to interact with these viruses that can interact with Kamen Rider Ghost. And then they've also taken Kamen Rider Ghost essence and put it into their bottles, which they use for their Kamen Rider forms. So not only have they captured the essence of a spiritual being and bottled it into pure power, they've also interacted with him, people that have interacted with him as well, and then goons that were beating him up. So to answer the question, yes, he can interact with Yhwach. Just thought we would go ahead and make that clear. So where are we at in terms of this battle? Well, if we're looking at their physical stats, Evolt is much stronger by a few universes to possibly infinite universes, being a multiversal plus being. However, Yhwach is actually 40% faster before Evolt actually uses the 50 times multiplier and just basically gives himself a Super Saiyan-like amp to then become faster than Yhwach. At which point he could probably just beat up Yhwach in a physical fight, and then it's more of a question of, can Evolt actually permanently keep Yhwach down? Because it's not enough to just beat him up. In fact, we don't even really fully comprehend how Yhwach is permanently dead, or even if he is permanently dead in the current Bleach manga. All that we see happen is that he's beaten 10 years ago by Ichigo, and he has residual Ryatsu bubbling up, possibly going to revive him again, and then Ichigo's son, Kazui, touches the latent Ryatsu and kind of just disperses it. So it's assumed that Yhwach is completely dead at this point, but he's also kind of like a force of nature in Bleach that revives himself every 1,000 years, or at least 1,000 years after he's killed. And so it's a little hard to say if Evolt just punching and kicking Yhwach is going to be enough to kill him. And so the alternatives for him to be able to beat someone like Yhwach would to be either just poison him and then just hope that that either permanently kills him or just pretty much leaves him in a state of agony for the rest of his life. As even if he uses something like the zombie, right, which has some form of biological manipulation, it still uses human physiology, which we know does not stack up to Evolt's poison based on its numerous showings in the show. And then there's also the idea that Evolt might just take over Yhwach's body if he gets frustrated. He might just leave a piece of his DNA inside of him and just kind of carry him around like a goon, which is a little bit disrespectful. If the stats were equalized, which I know a lot of people are probably wanting to hear because this is when things actually do get a bit interesting, it's kind of hard to say how the fight would actually end because they're both really unkillable. Yhwach from just a timeline hopping sense, and Evolt from just the fact that you can really never permanently stamp out his DNA, and he would just keep coming back through Yhwach. Which kind of does say that it probably means Evolt would win the long haul, with his DNA constantly coming through Yhwach, sapping his energy, poisoning him with this alien poison that is completely dominant over human physiology, and would, yeah, just eventually lead to Evolt's victory. Although it's not to say that Yhwach wouldn't put up a really good fight, because again, like I'm saying, it would last for quite a long time. Because not to downplay Yhwach, he's a pretty slippery dude. I mean, in most fights that Yhwach has had, pretty much everyone thought they had him beat, save for Yamamoto, but technically Yamamoto thought he had him beat 1,000 years ago, and apparently he didn't. It's like Yhwach always finds a way to slip out of a fight. It's just, it really doesn't matter if he keeps running away to a different future, if Evolt is just going to keep poisoning and taking over his body. And with how dodgy the Almighty appears in the last 5 chapters of Bleach, it doesn't seem very likely that he'd be able to just erase Evolt or something, especially if he tries the absorption thing that he did against Aizen. That's almost an immediate loss for Yhwach. Using Sanct Alter or trying to absorb him is pretty much immediate GG for Evolt, which I guess just kind of goes to show how OP something like biological manipulation really is in versus battles. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I would actually like to do Aizen versus Kamen Rider Kronos as well, as they're pretty similar as well. Kronos and Aizen are both these characters that were in it for the long haul. They pretty much planned out the entire series, but they're also, funny enough, just not quite as strong as people that come after them. Kronos being weaker than Evolt and Aizen being weaker than Yhwach. I think that would also be a pretty interesting matchup. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Remember to leave a like and subscribe for more power scaling content. And with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.